I've always been afraid of the dark, but tonight, my fear was justified. It all started when I decided to take a walk at 9:45 p.m. I needed to clear my mind after a rough day, and a walk usually helps. But this night was different. I usually take the same route home, but there's this group of bullies who hang out near my house. I didn't want to deal with them, so I decided to take a different route. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. The streetlights were dim, and the sidewalks were empty. It felt like something out of a horror movie. I was walking down a deserted street when a man suddenly stepped out from the shadows, blocking my path. He looked disheveled and agitated. His eyes were wild, and his hands were trembling. He stared at me for a moment, and then he started shouting. You're the one who ruined my life," he yelled. I was confused. "I think you've got the wrong person," I said, trying to stay calm. But he didn't listen. He kept shouting, accusing me of being someone else, someone who had wronged him in the past. I tried to explain that I wasn't who he thought I was, but he didn't believe me. His eyes were filled with rage. Then, he pulled out a rusted knife and waved it menacingly. My heart started pounding, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I knew I had to get out of there. I saw a convenience store at the end of the block and decided to run for it. As I turned to run, the man grabbed my arm and shook me violently. I managed to break free and sprinted toward the store. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the pavement. I could feel his hot breath on my neck as he got closer. I pushed myself up and kept running, leaving my backpack behind. I didn't care about it anymore. All I wanted was to get to the safety of the store. The man caught up and slashed at me with the knife, cutting the strap of my backpack. I felt a rush of adrenaline and ran faster, my legs burning with each step. I finally reached the store and burst through the door, startling the clerk inside. The clerk, who I recognized from my frequent visits, quickly assessed the situation. I pleaded for help, explaining that the man outside was after me. The clerk locked the door and tried to reassure me, but the man started pounding on the glass, screaming to be let in. The sound of breaking glass filled the store as the man smashed the door with a knife. He reached through the shattered pane to unlock it. The clerk grabbed a baseball bat from behind the counter, ready to defend us. I hid behind a shelf, trying to make myself as small as possible. I watched the man through the gaps in the cans and packages. His hand was bleeding from where he had cut himself breaking the glass, and he looked even more crazed. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The man stalked through the aisles, muttering to himself, eyes scanning for me. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. The clerk pressed a silent alarm while continuing to talk to the man, trying to keep him calm. I looked around for something to defend myself with and grabbed a heavy can. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Police sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder. The man became more agitated, sensing the police were on their way. He found me hiding behind the shelf and lunged at me with the knife. I threw the can as hard as I could, hitting him in the head and momentarily stunning him. The clerk swung the bat, knocking the knife out of the man's hand. The man collapsed, dazed and confused. The police arrived just in time, bursting into the store and subduing the man. They handcuffed him and took him away. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. As I walked home, escorted by the police, I knew I'd never forget the night I took the wrong path. The fear and danger I felt were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I realized how close I'd come to being seriously hurt or worse. I reflected on the experience, thinking about the fear and the unexpected bravery I found within myself. It was a night that changed me forever. And as much as I hated the dark before, I now had a new reason to be afraid of it. If I learn anything from that night, it's that you never know what dangers lurk in the shadows. I'll always be more careful about where I walk at night. And I'll never forget the man who mistook me for someone else, almost costing me my life. I never thought a simple evening walk could turn into a nightmare. It started like any other night. At 10 p.m., I stepped out of my house for a walk, hoping to clear my mind. The air was cool, and the neighborhood was unusually silent. I felt a slight unease, but I brushed it off and began my usual route. As I walked, I spotted a man up ahead, hunched over on the sidewalk. He was drawing something on the ground with a piece of chalk, mumbling to himself. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what he was doing. The symbols he was drawing looked strange and unsettling, like something out of a bad dream. Suddenly, the man looked up and locked eyes with me. His eyes were wild and unblinking, and a sinister smile spread across his face. My heart pounded, and I quickly looked away, picking up my pace. I glanced back and saw him still staring at me, his smile never fading. I hurried home, my unease growing with every step. When I finally reached my house, I locked the door behind me and tried to shake off the encounter. Just a harmless eccentric, I told myself, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I was just beginning to relax when I heard a knock on the door. I froze, my mind racing back to the man on the sidewalk. The knocking became more insistent, echoing through the silent house. My heart raced as I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. It was him. The man from the sidewalk stood there, his face now devoid of the sinister smile but filled with an unsettling intensity. Fear gripped me. Should I call the police? But my fear paralyzed me. Then, he started speaking. His voice was low and gravelly, saying things only I could know, private details about my life. My fear intensified as I realized this man had been watching me for a long time. He began to scratch at the door, the sound grating and relentless. My mind raced. What did he want? How did he know so much about me? Desperation set in. I moved to the back door, intending to escape, but found it securely locked from the outside. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. My phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. I answered it, and my blood ran cold. It was his voice on the other end. The power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. The man's whispers turned into angry shouts, and he began to pound on the door. I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife, my hands shaking. The footsteps inside the house grew closer. I shined the flashlight around, the beam shaking in my trembling hand. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice barely steady. There was no response, just the sound of footsteps getting closer. The pounding on the door stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. In the darkness, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam catching a glimpse of movement. The man was inside the house, his eyes gleaming in the dark. We struggled, my knife clattering to the floor. He slipped away, vanishing into the shadows. I could hear faint, mocking laughter echoing through the house. The power flickered back on, and I rushed to the living room, hoping the ordeal was over. But then I saw it, a message scrawled in chalk on the wall, "I'll be watching." A chill ran down my spine. I never saw the man again, but the fear remained. I changed my routine, installed security systems, and never walked alone at night again. The experience left me haunted, a reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the most familiar places. But the horror didn't end there. Every night, strange things would happen. I would hear faint scratching sounds coming from the walls, as if someone was trying to get in. Objects in my house would move on their own. I would leave my keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the coffee table later. One night, I woke up to find the words soon written on my bathroom mirror in the same chalky handwriting. The fear was suffocating. I started sleeping with the lights on, but even that didn't help. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, always just out of sight. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was an intense, almost physical sensation, like a pair of eyes were constantly on me. I covered my windows with thick curtains, but it didn't make a difference. The sensation persisted, gnawing at my sanity. One evening, as I was double-checking all the locks, I heard the familiar knock at the door. My heart stopped. I didn't dare to look through the peephole this time. The knocking continued, slow and deliberate. I backed away, clutching the knife again. Then, the knocking stopped, and a piece of paper was slid under the door. I waited, listening for any sign of movement. After what felt like an eternity, I picked up the paper. Written in the same chalky handwriting were the words, "You can't hide forever." I was at my wit's end. I installed more locks, more cameras, and even set up motion sensors around the house. But nothing could erase the fear. The man's presence lingered, an invisible specter that haunted my every move. The experience left me a shell of my former self. I could no longer find peace, even in my own home. Every night was a battle against the fear that gripped me. The memory of that night is a constant reminder that safety is an illusion. And every time I hear a knock on the door, my heart skips a beat, wondering if he has returned to finish what he started. I never thought something as simple as a night walk could turn into the longest night of my life. It was around 10 p.m. when I stepped out, the streets dimly lit and quiet, the perfect setting to clear my head. But as I passed by the old park on Maple Street, a man sitting on a bench caught my eye. He didn't just glance my way, he stared, unblinking, with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Trying to shake off the unease, I picked up my pace. The silence of the night was broken only by the rhythm of my footsteps until they weren't mine alone. The sound of another set of steps echoed mine, quickening as I quickened, slowing as I slowed. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw him, the same man from the park. He was following me, matching my steps with a precision that turned my initial discomfort into real fear. I turned down a street I wouldn't normally take, my heart hammering in my chest. The buildings here were closer together, casting long shadows that felt like they were reaching out to me. I darted into an alley, hid behind a dumpster, and watched. The man paused at the entrance, his head turning left and right, searching. For a moment, our eyes met before I ducked down. I held my breath, listening as his footsteps finally retreated. Relieved, I made my way home, constantly looking over my shoulder. Once inside, I locked the door and checked all the windows. My house, usually a sanctuary, felt foreign and threatening, as if it were aware of the night's events and disapproved of my intrusion. Trying to calm down, I went through my nightly routine with shaky hands, every creak and groan of the house setting my nerves on edge. I was just about to turn in for the night when I heard it, a soft, deliberate scratching coming from the front door. My heart froze. The door. I had locked it, hadn't I? Creeping towards it, I reached out with trembling hands to make sure. It was closed, but not fully latched. A cold draft swept through the crack, carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible whisper. Peering through the gap, my worst fears were confirmed. The man's face, pale and distorted by the shadows, was pressed into the space. His eyes, wide and gleaming with a mad intensity, met mine. He pushed the door slowly, the old hinges groaning under his weight. "You invited me," he whispered, a chilling smile spreading across his face. I stumbled back, my mind racing for a way out. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with an oppressive terror. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy floor lamp, and wielded it like a club. "Stay back!" I shouted, more to embolden myself than to frighten him. The stranger paused, tilting his head as if amused by my defiance. Then, with startling quickness, he lunged. I swung the lamp, missing him by inches. The bulb shattered against the wall, plunging the room into semi-darkness. I took advantage of his momentary disorientation and dashed for the bedroom, slamming the door shut and shoving my dresser against it. The house was silent for a heartbeat, then came the banging. Each thud against the door was a deafening crash in the quiet of the night. I searched frantically for my phone, fingers clumsy with panic. I dialed 911, my voice a whisper as I pleaded for help. Outside, the banging grew more desperate, the stranger's grunts and muffled shouts filtering through the wood. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. I held my breath, listening. Sirens in the distance cut through the silence, growing louder. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, the man was gone. They found the front door wide open and me, huddled in the corner of my bedroom, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The officers searched the area but found no sign of the stranger. He had vanished into the night as mysteriously as he had appeared. They told me he probably thought the house was empty, a small comfort when I considered what might have happened if I hadn't been alert. I don't take late-night walks anymore. The fear of that night has never completely left me. Every shadow seems to conceal a threat, and every unexpected sound is a potential danger. My home no longer feels like the safe haven it once was. Now, it's just four walls, a lock, and the memory of the night when I was not alone.